as the interim chair, I will call the March 3rd, 2021 Audit Committee meeting order. And Ms. Pisano, would you like to sort of walk us through this?
Yeah, sure. Well, first up, I will do roll call so we can confirm that we have a quorum present. So I'll start with that. Interim Chair Mekachuk.
Present.
Wei.
Here.
Chua.
Here.
Thank you. And I will note that Director Martinez Beltran is absent and we do have a quorum of the committee.
Okay, and then can you share the agenda? I don't have multiple screens open or.
Yeah, absolutely. So next we would have public comment on any matters not listed on the agenda.
If there's any members of the public that would like to speak on any matters that are not listed on the agenda, please raise your hand.
And I see no members.
Seeing none, we will close the public comment, and I'm not sure if there's any written comments.
No comments have been received.
No comments. So we will close that portion of the agenda, and we'll move to the first item, which is to select an audit committee chair and a vice chair.
And Chair, if we could address the consent calendar, please. Item 1.
Okay, the minutes are on the consent calendar, and I would put forth that I watched the meeting, and I was not at the meeting, but I watched the video of it today, and I believe that the minutes are correct relative to the video that I saw. So I would put a motion forward to approve the consent calendar. And I'd look for a second.
I'll second that.
Roll call.
Thank you, Chair. And I don't see any members of the public wishing to speak on the item, so I will move forward with roll call. Interim Chair Mekachuk.
Aye.
Wei.
I'm going to, I'm sorry, abstain on that because I did not read the, I didn't attend and didn't listen to it.
Okay, thank you. And just to let you all know, even if you did not partake or listen to the minutes, you can still vote on the minutes. If anybody does abstain, because we only have 3 out of 4 members, we will not have a majority to approve the minutes, and therefore they would not pass.
Okay, I withdraw my abstention. Aye.
Okay, thank you. Chua.
I wasn't there, but I will, it's a yes.
Thank you. And I'll note that Director Martinez Beltran is absent and this motion carries. And so next on the agenda is the selection of the 2021 SVCE Audit Committee Chair and Vice Chair. I'll actually be kicking off this item. So as we discussed prior to the start of this meeting, this is a brand new committee. And so we will need to select a chair to preside over our meetings in addition to a vice chair who would preside over these meetings in the absence of our chair. So with that, I will open it up for any discussion from our committee members.
I'll start off by volunteering to be chair, and now I'll explain why. I'm currently a licensed CPA in Canada, not in the United States, but I've attended lots of audit committee meetings on the auditor side, but not on the director side, so our audit committee side. So I've got a bit of been there, done that, and I would volunteer to chair the meetings.
I'll second that.
Alternate Director, would you like to make the nomination?
Do you want me to make a nomination or somebody else?
Yes, I realize that.
Okay, I will nominate Director Mekenchuk to be our chair.
I second that. Yeah. Did you guys hear my second?
Yes, thank you. Now, if we'd like to open it up to any members of public who'd like to make a comment. And I see none. We can bring it back to the group for a vote. And this would be to nominate Director Mekenchuk to serve as chair of the Audit Committee for 2021. Alternate Director Wei,
Aye.
Chua,
Aye.
Mekenchuk.
Aye.
Thank you. That motion carries unanimously with Director Martinez-Beltran absent. And now if we would like to move on to the vice chair nomination, if anybody would like to make a nomination.
It sounds like this is a volunteering thing. I'll volunteer. Yeah. Okay, I guess it's just a backup position. So, but
Move
somebody needs
to-
to make a nomination.
Move to nominate the Director Wei as vice chair of the Audit Committee.
I'll second the motion.
Great, thank you. We've already opened public comment for the item and I don't see anybody, so we can bring this back for a vote. Just 1 second, please. All right. Chair Mekenchuk,
Aye.
Wei,
Aye.
Chua.
Aye.
Thank you. And that motion carries unanimously for Director Wei to serve as our vice chair of the 2021 Audit Committee with Director Martinez-Beltran absent today. And I'll go ahead and share my screen for the next item on the agenda, which is to receive financial audit report from Pisenti and Brinker.
And this is discussion only. The next two items are discussion only, so there's no action required.
Okay, so before we begin, let me introduce myself. Amrit Singh, I'm the CFO. I joined SVC in November. I'm pleased to be here with you and thank you for being with us this afternoon. So yeah, the main purpose of today's meeting is to go through our financial audit that Pisenti and Brinker will present to you. This will be taken to the board next week for approval. So if you have any comments, questions, suggestions, please do let us know so we can address them. And also we have Mike Mayer. He's our accountant, and he'll be available to answer any questions as well. But before we go into the financial audit, let me just give a brief overview of the types of audit that we encounter at SVCE. And that's within the scope of this committee's overview. So there are three main audits. One is the financial audit that you will go through and review today. The other is the IT audit. So this audit gets into our IT infrastructure and particular focus to cybersecurity. And Nick Zanato, our IT analyst, who's heads and who manages our IT infrastructure and leads the audit, facilitates all the audit activities, will present an overview after the financial audit on what the IT audit entails. So this audit basically we will start this audit next month in April. It will conclude in sometime around June, and then we will work on any remediations that come out of the audit. And then we will bring the findings back to this committee in September. We're proposing to bring it back to the committee in September when we meet which will also be the time when we'll kick off our financial audit for the current fiscal year. The third audit that we conduct is called an Advanced Metering Infrastructure Audit. So this is a California Public Utilities Commission directed audit, CPUC directed audit. And this basically gets at, because we have access to customer data. So it gets into how we treat confidential customer data. So it's a CPC required audit. And it's conducted on CPUC's schedule. So it's conducted every 3 years. So we will not have an AMI audit this year, but we will have an AMI audit in April of next year. And again, Nick, when he goes through his presentation, he'll touch on this. So with that, before I turn it over to Bradford to go through the financial audit, let me just make one note, and thanks to Chair Mekachek for bringing this to our attention. The financial statements, the draft statements we sent out, there's a correction on note 9 on the purchase commitments. We had said in there that professional service contracts provided contractual commitments go out to year 2043. There was a typo. We don't have any professional services contracts that go out that long. The services most go out to is 2024, and this is our data management services provided by Calpine. And the 2043 was a typo because we do have power purchase agreements, the long-term power purchase agreements that do go out to that time frame. So we will make that correction. And again, thanks to Brian Mekachek for bringing this to our attention. Any questions before I turn it over to Brett?
I want to kind of jump in here for a sec, because I think the three of us that are audit committee members are all new. There's no continuity from the previous audit committee. And I had a conversation this morning with Mr. Bradford, and I didn't understand how the financial statements came together and who was responsible for them and who prepared them. And he described to me how Mayor Accountancy works. And I think it's critical that the other audit committee members understand how the financial statements are prepared. So I'm not sure, Mr. Mayor, would you like to introduce yourself and describe the process and what you fulfill? Because I believe you're in a fairly unique role among CCAs.
Yes, that's right. Yes, so I'm Mike Maher Accountancy. We do work with a number of other CCAs, and we essentially work as kind of an outsourced accounting department, partly because of our knowledge and experience with GASB financials and utilities, but also with a focus on internal controls. So we have a background in our office in preparing and performing audits. So we do bring that background into these financial statement preparations. So basically how it works, each month we do close the books. We do compiled financial statements with no note disclosures. And at the end of the year, we do the note disclosures, prepare the MD&A, and then present it to the auditors to do their work.
Sorry, so the auditors review that every month, or you prepare them monthly? And just clarify that part of the process, please.
So each month we do a compiled financial statements in-house. So we have a compilation letter that's associated with it. That's not an audit. It's not at the stage of an audit. It's not being audited by any independent party. That's month to month. And I mention that only because we do have a practice of closing the books and records and creating these the statements, if you will, not the note disclosures every month. So we have processes in place for that. So when the year comes around, there certainly is a lot of year-end work that has to be done in preparation for the audit. We hold the books open longer, et cetera, et cetera. At that point, we prepare the notes, disclosures, and the MD&A, the section that precedes the financial statements. And that's reviewed by Silicon Valley, by Omrit, my staff. And after that point, we prepare, or we give what has been prepared to the auditors to opine on the statements. And of course, they're doing other substantive work on the data that goes into that in the meantime, various testings. But these financial statements themselves are, for the most part, prepared by my office and then edited, critiqued by the auditors as well.
Thank you. Mr. Bradford, would you like to comment on that, please?
Yeah, that's an accurate depiction of the relative roles and responsibilities here. Just as a reminder for everybody, so we have to stay as the independent auditor, as the name would suggest, remain independent. So the fact that Maher prepares the financial statements that we audit under the direction and supervision of Omrit and his team helps us maintain our independence. So that's a very great relationship and a good dynamic from our perspective.
And I am unclear about this, so I'm asking Garesh, does the audit committee and or Amrit, does the audit committee recommend to the board that they approve the financial statements, or are we an audit committee and we don't do that? Because I just want to clarify the role of the audit committee. And I realize that the financial policies were sent out. Ms. Pisano, thank you for sending them to me. But it was unclear to me what the role is in the charter.
So I think, yeah, go ahead,
ahead.
Rich.
I don't actually have an answer for you in terms of recommendation or that you've reviewed it. I know I'm thinking about what some of the other committees do, and we've done it both ways on some items. So I'm going to actually ask maybe Andrea or one of our consultants who've been around longer and may have a better memory than I do as to what we asked of the audit committee.
I can chime in there. My recollection is that the audit committee does make the recommendation to the board that they accept the audited financials. At the board meeting, typically gives a pretty brief little recap of our interactions throughout the process. Andrea Pisano, does that sound correct to you?
Yes, it does. I know that in the past, we've brought the financial statements and the preliminary audit, if you will, to the audit committee to ask any questions and kind of flush out anything prior to going to the board.
If I may, we will confirm that by sending something to the board, and maybe even during the meeting, if you have the time, we'll go back to the previous audit committee meetings from last year and see if we can get an answer for you during the meeting. And if not at the meeting, we will respond after the meeting with what we did in the last year.
And also just something, so at this point, yes, that's true. You would be recommending the board accept, right, the audit. And it's a little awkward with the change of the committee now, but through the process, a key function of the audit committee, and Brett maybe can touch on it too, is that interaction with the auditors. So to talk to them privately, to ask questions of anything maybe you would like auditors to look at or disclose. So that's a key piece too. In the end, the auditors are reviewing management's work, but they're really working for the board, and you're the face of the board in this position. So that's an important aspect. It's a little awkward having to change at this point. but that's, as I understand it, an important feature of the committee.
But it's COVID makes things difficult, and having remote meetings, but also the changing of the board and the audit committee makes it even more complex. And then we've got a new CFO, and that started after the end of the year. So that kind of, I don't know, makes it difficult. And I may be a little more on the, I don't want to say rigid side, but I really think it's important to follow the appropriate governance. And we're not, if we don't recommend the if we don't recommend that the financial statements are ready for the board, we should do that prior to the board meeting, and we may only have to have a brief meeting to do that. But Mr. Bradford, maybe you can speak to one of the items that we discussed for the benefit of the other people in the meeting, and the management rep letter.
Sure. So the management rep letter is we basically provide that to management in a template form, since it has a bunch of required elements under the auditing standards. And basically it just makes a bunch of assertions that are related to the financial statements. And it's a standard operating procedure for all financial statement audits. And management makes sure takes the time to make sure they understand all the representations. And if they have any questions, we talk about them or make any modifications if that's deemed appropriate. And then management sends back the rep letter, and then we hand over the audited financials with our signed opinion letter at that point. So that's at the last stage of the process, which I think is going to occur. Andrea Lifto, feel free to comment, should occur probably tomorrow or the day after, right? If we're going to get the final into the board packet.
I think we're just waiting to see what other comments were there for the financials draft. Any changes?
And then could you also please explain the importance of the date of the audit report, Mr. Bradford?
The date of the audit report is going to match the date on the management rep letter. And that will be the date through which we have evaluated asked about any subsequent events, and it's the cutoff for our responsibility, so to speak, on any additional information that might be relevant to the readers.
Thank you. So it's pretty hard for the audit committee to approve the financial statements for the board prior to you receiving the rep letter. And if I recall my days as an auditor, I know that the CEO would never sign the rep letter before the CFO signed off. And I, as an auditor, could never sign off on the financial statements as on the audit side until I had the rep letter in my hand. So it's kind of a chain of interactions, but it shows the governance and the responsibility of those financial statements. The other part, I think, Mr. Mayor, you talked about the independent conversations. Do you want to just explain to the audit committee the importance of management meeting with the audit committee, and the audit committee then meeting with the auditor independently to ask questions?
I mean, that's probably, that's probably something that Brett should talk on, being the auditor, as that's something that's going to go on, outside of the conversation that the audit committee is going to have with the auditor is going to happen between the auditor without us, obviously. So, but again, it's important for them to have an open line of communication. Maybe they want to bring certain topics up that are financial related, or anything that the auditor might want to take a look at. So Brad, if you have maybe some insight on the types of things that the audit committee typically discusses, it might be helpful.
Yeah, the quote unquote the quote closed session. It's a very good governance practice to have that without fail, even if there is nothing to talk about, because it just provides that venue for direct board and auditor interaction without having management around. The idea being that, you know, if there was something that the auditor wanted to say that, you know, could be taken critically or reflect poorly on management, they would be free to speak in that forum since management wouldn't be present. So that's the idea of not having management there, just making sure that there's a venue for some free conversations to be had.
Perfect, thank you. So I think the last few minutes has been important for the audit committee to understand the process and what it entails as an independent audit committee. And then Amrit, you were going to, continue. Do you want to discuss the financial statements? Or I'm sorry, Suresh, go ahead.
Yeah, I just raised my hand. By the way, alternate director Hung Wei also has her hand raised. I don't know if she has a comment, but I'll finish mine. So we did check our previous years, what the audit committee did it was receive the audit report, and so did the board. So that was done in February 2020.
Okay. And Director Wei, you have your hand raised? You're on mute.
2020 most popular phrases, you're muted. Okay, so I was on the audit committee for our school district. So you know, we alternate. So in a word, like today we're gonna open discussion with Brad and our management to ask questions. And then is it customary for us to have a closed session? Because that never happens. Is it? Do we always have a closed session then after this with you, Brad?
Yes, sometimes a closed session, you know, occurs at the meeting. Those have been prior to this year, of course, they've been in person. So management will just leave the room.
Okay.
And then now we're on Zoom, and I understand it's considered a Brown Act meeting. So we may have to have a different arrangement for that, which we're kind of open to. Maybe just a one-on-one or a one-on-two call, whatever's going to work without getting you know, having the Brown Act stand in the way of that. So
Got it. And then to me, one of the most important thing is to find your suggestions. What can be improved, right, in different areas. So when we will get your suggestions.
we can provide those today. And
okay.
we actually have basically none. And we can talk about that, and I can talk about some of the history there of what the suggestions have been in the past. Fill out the context for why that is. School district's a lot different.
Yes.
Most definitely. And I'm happy to take you through kind of the either school district or cities for that matter, some of the differences and why the audit kind of transpires the way it does.
Yeah, and this looks much simpler. I mean, the finance report is much simpler than our school district. So yeah, I'm just here to like Chair McIntyre said to clear the process. Okay.
So yeah, I can dive in whenever you'd like. I'll let you set the agenda.
Well, why don't we do two things? Perhaps you can explain the process, and maybe if you put that in the city perspective, that would be good versus the school perspective, if that's okay with the other directors. And then I think also we need to hear the findings and your disagreements, if anything, and your evaluation of the estimates, et cetera, the things we discussed earlier. So I'll let you take over, Mr. Bradford.
Okay, sure. The main, main difference, but the biggest difference here, certainly between all of the CCAs and how they're run versus a city. Cities, in my experience, typically have many funds set up and have a different fund set up for each funding source often, and often each funding source will have different requirements, could have federal requirements, state requirements, and anything, a lot of money from various sources gets thrown at cities, and they're kind of the catch-all. I mean, counties can be that as well, if it's not a city that's focused as a city item. But and the cities have to deal with all that accounting, and often have staffing limitations and other resource limitations. So you take that complexity and combine it with the limitations. That typically does result in a lot of comments. With the CCAs, that at least the ones that we've been involved with so far, they have the luxury, so to speak, of doing one thing only and having only one fund and one significant activity, buying and selling electricity. Additionally, knock on wood, so far all of the CCAs have had adequate resources to deploy for the accounting, which is very good because the accounting is complicated and hyper specific to this industry. So that's the two factors there that lead to it being although the numbers are pretty large, and you look at the top line revenue, it's a pretty big number. And a lot of the CCAs are like that, as others are like that as well. It, because it's of the quote unquote relative simplicity, setting aside the size of the dollars, it makes things go pretty smoothly, and having a really nicely qualified and staffed accounting team surrounding the processes helps as well. So some of the comments we've had in the past years were mainly things like, I think one of the first or second year was having an IT risk assessment audit, which Mr. Zanotto took that to heart and had that done. Things like that. I don't have them all at the tip of my fingers right now, but it's pretty minor stuff like that. It's really unusual to not have any adjustments or past adjustments, but we haven't had one yet with Silicon Valley. Yeah, that's the reason why we really don't even have any recommendations. If you would like us to dig up some recommendations, we can, but our task is to opine on the material accuracy of the financials and then comment if we see any weaknesses in internal controls surrounding the production of those financial statements, or weaknesses over custody of assets, say cash primarily, things like that, then we absolutely comment. Most of the CCAs that we work with, to be frank, that stand out with respect to having a pretty tight operation. And I'll let Ms. Lithgow could back me up when I say that making comments and findings, and sometimes being fairly rough, we're not averse to it, but we don't do it just so that we can look like we're doing our job, so to speak. So that's a pretty long-winded explanation, but do you have any follow-on questions that I could help there on that?
I don't have a following questions, but I do have, I see that our employees 25, so, right, is it 23 in 2018, 25 now? Maybe I read it wrong. Okay, it's a small, consider the school district or the city, this is
Oh gosh, yeah.
Yes, much smaller operation.
Yeah,
the money is big.
And there's no, what's very common for cities, especially in school districts too, certainly is all of the compliance requirements. There's laws and regulations, just as a JPA, they're fairly basic, but you don't have those compliance requirements where you got different buckets of money. Oh, my dog's crept into the picture. Sorry, that's Petey. You don't have compliance requirements where the Fed or state, schools, you've got all the state requirements, of course. So you're blissfully free of those. If you ever decide to accept money from the feds and you spend more than $750,000 in 1 year, then you guys will have to look at those. It's the single audit requirements, and those can be rough. But for right now, you don't have any of those funding sources either. So again, pretty straightforward.
I guess one of the key users of the financial statements would be the rating agencies, and SVCE was able to get a really good rating just recently, and that was a very positive thing. Okay, do you want to, I guess I'll formally ask a couple of questions, and maybe we don't have to have a closed session due to the logistics right now, but I would ask if there were any disagreements with management regarding the estimates in the financial statements and management's judgments.
Sure. The main estimate, the most significant estimate, is the allowance for doubtful accounts. One of the main things that we do to I apologize. My dog is trapped in here with me because they're doing some work on my house. Sorry about that. The main estimate being the allowance for doubtful accounts. And what we do there primarily is we look at the aging. We perform what we call analytical procedures. And we look at the aging of the accounts receivable and look at the older buckets and compare it against the amount of the allowance that's recorded. So last year, I can have that open right here. Last year, the reserve for doubtful accounts was running at about 124%. So it was greater than the 120 days aging bucket last year. The 120 days aging bucket this year has increased a bit to approximately 1.78 million. So it has shrunk relative to the aging bucket, but at the end of the day, and we look at the numbers there, we still think it's materially adequate. So we didn't propose an adjustment for that, although it has shrunk a bit. So, I think that it's something that Maher looks at pretty closely, and that I think you're going to need to continue to look at it closely. Possibly the effects of COVID could come into play there. And if there's any cause to increase the allowance as a result of that. But at present, it still looks like we're within tolerable range there. That is the biggest estimate, and really the only one that's on our radar in terms of risks in the financial statements.
Mr. Mayor, would you like to comment on that, please?
Yeah, so and I think one of the things that we went over during the audit period, maybe it was more with Andrea, on the bad debt allowance. So that the ending reserve may have gone down as a percentage of the outstanding accounts receivable, but one of the reasons for that is we did have a large amount of write-offs during the year that, by its very nature, reduces both the reduces the ending allowance, right? That's a balance sheet item. So the total expense is the other side of it. We did have more expenses, if you will, recognized during the year. So yeah, but to Brett's point, the ending reserve covers really most of our aged receivables beyond 90, 120 days or so. So that ending receivable that has not yet been written off pretty well covers, we're comfortable that it covers the old receivables that are unlikely to be collected.
and I was speaking with Mr. Bradford about this earlier today. Sales are presented in the financial statements as a net number, net of the write-offs, and the note disclosure on that is somewhat unclear. But now I understand it, and maybe Mr. Mayor, you could explain that for the benefit of the other directors.
Yeah, so that's I believe it's unique to GASB on proprietary funds that the revenue needs to be reported net of the allowance. So it's not just the write-off amount, but it's also our estimated amount that has not yet been written off. So if we sell, 100, but we only expect to collect 98, we're only going to show as revenue on our financial statements the 98. So, and it is indicated on the financial statement itself. It says revenues net, but if it's not very clear to a reader, a first-time reader of this statement, that's what it means, then maybe we can make a quick addition to that note to mention that. I think it's maybe described somewhere in the MD&A a little bit, but there's an appropriate place in the note disclosure. So we'll take a look at that. Maybe we can add a simple sentence to.
I thought I did see it somewhere on the. Okay, so are we asking questions now? So you're not going to go through the draft report. We're just going to ask questions because I have some questions.
I think that right now what we're doing is we're asking both management and the auditor questions on the financial statements because they belong to management, and the auditor has to opine on those financial statements to the extent that they're presented with no material errors.
Okay. So sorry, what's the procedure? Are we taking turns asking questions, or we just ask questions as we?
We can take turns. It's kind of free form. So Director Way, if you have more questions, please ask.
We have a brief PowerPoint too, if you want to do that. That's
oh,
also
my apologies. Sure, if you could walk us through that, that would be perfect. I apologize.
So if you could advance the slide, please, Ms. Pisano. So introduction's already made. I've been around for a while, and we've been working on CCAs for a few years. Ms. Lifto, who hasn't had an opportunity to spoke yet, is the audit manager, and she's working with several of the CCA clients right now. So if we want to, this is probably only about 8 or 9 slides. Andrea, if you want to run through the slides, and I can chime in. So again, yeah, but don't hesitate, please, to interrupt with any questions whatsoever. The whole point of this is information exchange. So no problem.
Can I ask a question right here?
Absolutely.
Usually you would rotate auditors every, I don't know how many years. You don't have this, yeah.
In California, this is our 4th year doing the audit. So in California, for government agencies, school districts, cities, CCAs, the rule is that after, and this came online within about the last 5 years too. So I'd have to look at the exact date. So it's every 5 years. You don't have to rotate auditors. You have to rotate audit partners. So that's the rule there. So we would have to take a look at that if we were engaged beyond this year. And I do have another audit partner handy too.
Okay, got it.
So this is some of our background. Andrea, why don't you take it from here?
Perfect, thank you. And Andrea, I think, is it Andrea? Perfect, if you want to advance the slide really quick then, thank you. So as we've kind of mentioned, the audit is near completion. We are ready to send the rep letter out. We are expecting to opine an unmodified opinion. So there's 2 different opinions for the most part, unmodified or modified. You want the unmodified, meaning that you have a clean report that the financial statements are going to be reported as materially accurate. And we have not identified, as we mentioned earlier, any significant deficiencies in internal controls. And we've kind of already covered this slide as well. Roles, responsibilities, management. They're responsible for preparing the financials and the internal controls. And our responsibility is to come in and consider those risks of material misstatements in the financial statements, any internal controls that are relevant to the financials. We perform tests of the year-end balances based on a risk assessment, and then we evaluate the adequacy of the disclosures. We do internal walkthroughs. We speak with management and gain an understanding of the processes that are in place. I want to go ahead and advance the slide there. By gaining, the operating characteristics, practices, procedures, we compare our knowledge with other similar entities in the industry and refer to professional guidance and procedures and controls surrounding the significant transaction cycles and business processes. I think one of the key controls is bill.com that's being utilized. There's, the active electronic signatures, so you can see who's approved what transactions. So the areas that we focused on, kind of talked a little bit about this. We look at accounts receivable, revenue, hand in hand. We pull a sample of the customer billings. So we take a look at your accounts receivable. We select a sample. We obtain the blue bills. We test them, make sure the rates are accurate. Take a look at the cash that's received after year end related to the accounts receivable. Take a look at cash in total related to revenue. And we look at the revenue recognition in determining the accrued revenue balance on the financial statements as well. And then we confirm the cash balances with the financial institutions. And then we look at accrued cost of electricity. So we're reviewing the subsequent bills from the electricity providers and the cash payments. We look at the other liabilities. So we review contracts, the supporting documentation, and we determine the completeness of the amounts that have been recorded at year end. And then, of course, we review the financials and the note disclosures to make sure that they are complete and without bias. Required communications, I think this goes with Mr. Mekju, that we have the significant accounting policies that have been adopted by SVCE throughout the period are appearing appropriate and consistently applied. No alternative treatments or accounting principles for the material items in the financials have been discussed. And if you want to go ahead and we are not expecting to propose any adjustments, as we've mentioned earlier, and we have not identified any significant or unusual transactions or applications of accounting principles where a lack of authoritative guidance exists. And there's been no disagreements to your question with management concerning the scope of the audit, the application of accounting principles, or the basis for their management's judgments in any significant matters. And we have not encountered any difficulties in dealing with management during the performance of our audit. And our phone number is there. So if any questions do arise after today, after we've had time to schedule a one-on-one with you as required or requested, our number is there if you'd like to take note of that, and you can call us at any time. So now we could go back through the financials if you'd like with any questions. Ms. Wei?
Yes, I do have questions on the financials because this is the first time I'm looking at it. So are you going to go through the financial or I should just ask questions?
We can go through the financials. Does everyone have the draft there with them?
Perhaps Susanna can put them up on the screen. Would that be okay?
Yeah, that would be great.
Let's because we can definitely go through with a fine tooth comb, but I'm not sure that's going to serve everybody's time.
Okay.
So what, can you ask your questions first?
Sure.
That way we can make sure we address everything you'd like to address.
Sure, I'll just ask questions. Is that okay? For
Absolutely.
anybody? Okay. So what I make notes of what I found. So I found that the current assets has really grown from 2018 to 2020, and that's a great from 108 million to 220. So that's my question for the management. This had nothing to do with audit. Is are we going to anticipate similar growth in the next few years? So that's for management. And also the other non-current assets that decreased from 2018 to 2019, 2020. And I like the, explained very well. So that I want to make a commendation. That's because I didn't understand it when I read it. It went really well. So my main question is, do you think that unpredictable PG&E customer exit fees is going to be a liability, a risk in the future?
Is that a question for me, or is it up for grabs?
From an audit or financial point of view, or from management point of view?
I'm sure management can comment on it extensively, and
if it's not the scope of this, I think this could be answered by email.
Director Mekchek and I discussed this a bit earlier. There's a regulatory environment that always seems under scrutiny, and changes are possible. I'm going to let my dog out. I'm so sorry. He's going bananas.
We understand animals.
That is probably a question more directed to management. It's more a future projection.
Right. Okay.
So I'll just add that PCIA is one of our biggest uncertainty. It's the exit fee, as you mentioned, that PG&E charges all departed customers, and that does significantly affect our margins, our profitability. And there's a direct link to power prices and how the PCIA moves. For example, if power prices go up, the PCIA actually will go down, and vice versa. So there's a lag effect sometimes. You may see power prices going up and our costs going up, and next year the PCIA could go down, or the other way around. We are anticipating significant pressure from PCIA, and when we go through the budget update next week, you will see that our revenue projections for this year have shrunk significantly. And the biggest driver of that is actually the significant increase in PCIA. It was about 6% higher than what we anticipated, and that 6% has an impact of about 8 million in revenues for us. And so there's two things. There's a PCIA, then there's a PG&E generation rate, because we try to stay competitive with the PG&E generation rate. So when the generation rate comes down and PCIA goes up, PCIA is, again, paid by our customer, not by us. So we try to make our customers' rate 1% lower than PG&E so that they stay with us and we're competitive. So that means we have to shrink the rate we charge customers to make up for that headroom for the customer. And as a result, our revenues goes down. So next few years, this is an area we're spending significant amount of time right now trying to understand PCIA and get better modeling in our financial models and our risk models. But next few years, the indications are that PCIA will be on an upward trajectory, and a big part of this has to do with PG&E's collection of Diablo Canyon, the nuclear power plant, which they'll be retiring in 24 and 25. There are 2 units there. And until that retirement, we're going to have significant upward pressure on PCIA. So this will pose some challenge for us.
Thank you. So my next question is, what is the receipt from liquidated damage in 2020, the $6.6 million? That didn't happen in 2018, 2019.
Yeah, so this was one of our PP power purchase agreement with one of our suppliers. And normally we put certain performance obligations on our contracts, and they were not meeting those requirements. And we had the opportunity to walk away. And at that time, the decision was made, it was best interest for the company to walk away and collect those damages. So it's a one-time item. It's not a recurring item, but it's very common in our business to place those type of those kind of performance financial clauses in our power purchase agreements.
Okay, so that did not happen 2018-19, but this is
No,
2020.
yeah,
they have
it's
planned.
not
Okay.
unexpected, but it
Mhm.
does occur every now and then.
Okay, so when I look at the restricted cash, 4.5 million in 2020 and 5 million in 2019, I know we used to restrict it. We prefer to use restricted first. Can you give me an example of restricted cash?
Yes, so we have a line of credit with our bank, River City Bank. And as collateral, for the line of credit, they're holding about 3.5 million collateral. And then we also post a collateral with California Independent System Operator, CAISO. That was $1 million last year, but that number has come down significantly. I think it's around 600,000 for the coming year. And the reason for that, a big part of that is because we're a creditworthy counterparty now, and the requirements went down for us because of the credit rating we received with S&P and Moody's.
Okay, so I have a question. We have a line of credit with which bank?
River City.
Yeah, so for $35 million. It said it's going to expire October 2021. Are we going to keep it? Are we going to apply for a new one, or what's going to happen?
We are going to make an assessment whether how much liquidity we need, and this is one of the complex computations we're engaging work on right now. The business that we're in is very volatile. As you heard about what happened in Texas and what happened in last August for us here. So power prices can go up and down, and that can put significant draw on liquidity. And another aspect that requires us to carry sufficient liquidity is when we engage in our hedging contracts, when we enter into power purchase agreements for short term that could be up to 5-year, long-term PPAs, we don't have these credit provisions, but for our typical hedge transactions, we do. As a means of credit assurance, the counterparties can ask us to post collateral, and we can ask them to post collateral, whether the contract that we entered into is in the money for us or if it's in the money for them, as a means of mitigating credit risk. So you can think of credit risk as like your credit card company giving you a credit threshold, a credit limit. Same with our counterparties. We engage in we establish credit limits with each other. And once we exceed that limit, then we end up posting collateral, which can be a draw on our reserves and our cash. So we need to measure and make sure. So we do statistical modeling to say within 95% confidence interval how much cash could be drawn. So we will go through that analysis, and then at that point make an assessment whether we need to renew that or we have sufficient reserves that we can forego that.
Okay, so that's remained to be decided.
Yes.
Okay. So my last question actually was answered. I circled the December 2043. I'm like, that's kind of a long time to go. So that's being answered already. Okay, these are my questions.
Yeah. Director Zhao, do you have questions?
Not right now. I was going to ask about PCIA, but that has been answered. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
It strikes me that since several of the directors have had a question about the 6.6 million, that should be referenced in the MD&A just so that it kind of looks more complete. But I would defer to management's judgment on that.
There has been an update, and we did update that. It now in the operating revenues section in the MD&A. It does state that SVCE reports its revenue net of allowance for uncollectible accounts. In 2020, SVCE received 6.6 million in revenue from damages as the result of the termination of one of its long-term energy supply contracts that failed to meet certain development milestones. So it is now addressed in there.
Other question is about our liability insurance. According to our auditor, you think that's sufficient? The coverage is $2 million with deductible of 500.
To be entirely frank, it's not something that's typically in the scope of our consideration. I don't think it seems unreasonably low. If you didn't have insurance in place, certainly that would be a matter for concern that we'd bring up. But I'm just I would be very hesitant to render an opinion on if that's adequate to be. So it's just not in the scope of what we've been asked to do. So.
Okay, so that's probably a more of a management and board decision.
I think so, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Go ahead, Paresh.
Thank you. We'll take Director Wei's question about that she just had as a request, and I think part of just looking at our overall risk and risk mitigation, and that's something actually Amrit is a super expert at. So we will fold that into how we're looking at risk and bring it back to you.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask one more question? So we're going to have the IT audit in September. And is Brad, your company, doing the same? Are you? No, that's
No.
a totally different
Yeah,
thing.
that's it's highly specialized. We don't provide that service.
Got it. Okay.
Do you rely on that, the findings of that audit in your financial statements, in the audit of the financial statements? Is it a reliance on other experts?
No, technically, the answer to that is no. Like I said, we did comment in the early years that we thought that'd be very prudent considering these horror stories we hear every day about various shenanigans and frauds that can be perpetrated externally through the internet. But we don't have to, or I would say it's not relevant to any of the assertions which are embodied in the financial statements. The financial statement audit is primarily looking in the rear view mirror, a snapshot in time, whereas that'd be more of a risk focused, forward-looking concern with the IT audit, I think. Yeah, if we thought that the situation was where if a client had no concept of internal controls surrounding IT, then I would definitely comment on that in our communications with the board. But that said, beyond that, it's not our area of expertise.
Forgive me, without the agenda in front of me, are there other presentations? What else do we have on the agenda? And I'm wondering if we can close this portion.
If there are no other questions or comments, the next item on our agenda is IT and automated meter infrastructure audit overview.
So let me just summarize item 3. You intend, Mr. Bradford, you intend on issuing a clean audit opinion and without any internal control deficiencies. And
that's correct.
That next week.
Yeah, correct? Or I think actually this week I just looked. It looks like we tentatively have our rep letter dated for Friday. And if we're still holding with that, then we would be issuing this week. Again, Andrea Pisano, to get that into the board packet, you need that by?
Packet goes out Friday.
So there we go.
Okay, and then logistically, if we were to have a very brief board meeting, and assuming the financial statements, there's no changes to the financial statements, we could just have a very brief meeting with a single agenda item after public comment saying that that the audit committee would recommend that the board of directors approve the financial statements. Would that be logistically feasible? And that's kind of a general question for everyone.
Sorry, Brian, I missed this. Are you talking about another meeting of the audit committee, or you as the chair of the audit committee speaking at the board meeting?
No, I was thinking two things. First of all, well, that may be a simple way to do it. What I was thinking was if we were going to have a resolution of the audit committee saying that we formally approve that the board adopt the financial statements, that the audited financial statements, then we could, I'm not comfortable doing that now because we don't have, you know, the eyes haven't been, or the rep letter hasn't been completed. We don't have an audit report, but we could do that Monday, or I suppose thinking out loud, as you suggested, that I could have a call with the auditors and management, or just the auditors, and then report to the board of directors at that meeting that I had that conversation, and that, thinking out loud, the audit committee had authorized me to recommend those financial statements be approved if there were no material changes to those financial statements. And I would be open to whatever works logistically. Easy and simple is a good thing.
I think logistically, the latter option's probably better. And we do have a precedent. We do have the chair of committees reporting to the board. These typically are in the consent calendar, but I think for this purpose, we may make this maybe the first item. This would be the first item on the agenda, and have you speak to it. But of course, that would depend on what Evelyn and Hung Wei are willing to delegate to you.
So may I ask a question? So our function here is to review the audit draft and ask questions, and you know, if we have any findings, and work with the audit committee, the auditor and the staff to you know, to our satisfaction. But I don't think we're here to approve the audit report, right? If the board approves it. Or I'm a little confused.
Yep. Brett, would you talk about that? Because this is typically in the last several years, it's receive it.
Yeah, the way that I usually see it transpire is, you know, we have as much of our interaction and communication with the board by way of this committee, which we've done here today. And then you don't approve the audit per se, but receive it and generally make a recommendation to the board to approve it, I think is how it usually goes down. And we can or can't or don't need to. It's entirely up to all of you if we actually present at the board meeting. That's optional because we fulfilled our professional requirements for interaction with those charged with governance through this interaction here.
Sorry, Brett, you've made presentations to the board on this before, right? Yeah, so we have that. Secondly, looking at the past board actions, we've requested that the board receive it. I believe that's what we did in February 2020. Right, Andrea? So in both cases, we've had the audit committee and the board receive it. So they're not approving it. That's not what we.
I don't. Yeah, from my perspective, it doesn't matter because you know, once we've signed the report and delivered it, it is what it is. You know, what you do with it at that point is, you know, based on your protocols and procedures that you think are appropriate for governance.
Right, right. So what you're saying is, yeah, you're not changing it. This is what you see, you've provided it. I think, Brian, you have the opportunity to address the board on what, and we have two ways of doing it, and they can be an and. One is we could draft up a paragraph, right, which we'd work with you on so that this could be part of the packet as something coming from the chair of the committee. And so you can write a paragraph and we can add it to the packet. And then when it's discussed, you can also speak to it.
Okay, that sounds fine. If the audit, your opinion is directed to the board, is that correct, Mr. Bradford?
Yes, that is
So
correct.
to the board of directors, you know, the financial statements are fairly presented, etc. So what I am, and again, I'm thinking aloud, would be that my representation would be that as chair of the audit committee, we met with the auditors and management. We went through the financial statements, we went through the results of the audit, and we essentially did due diligence, asked questions, etc., on behalf of the board of directors. And we agree with everything, and therefore we would recommend that the board accept those financial statements. Does that sound appropriate?
Yeah, and I think the only thing I would add is I think you're going to have another conversation with Brett between now and the board meeting, so you'd refer to that too.
Yes.
Yep. So I think we can put together, sorry, excuse me.
I was just saying we'd want to have that conversation before the rep letter gets sent out as well. So Mr. McAtoo, if we could arrange a time, I will contact you after this meeting.
Sounds good. I'm available and flexible.
Great.
Yeah, and Andrea will connect with you, Brett, regarding the timing of our board packet going out. So it's actually Friday morning. So I'm sure she'd appreciate it tomorrow evening.
Bad news, I've been calling her Andrea. It's Andrea, sorry.
So can I ask a question? So I did not send the questions in because I thought we're going to discuss it. In the future, do you prefer I send the questions in first? This is like a procedural question. Or should I just ask during the audit meeting?
Keeps us on our toes, I think. That's.
Should I send it in first or just ask questions here?
From my perspective, for the questions that are in the scope of my work, I'm fine with however you'd like to do that.
Okay.
If I may add to that, sorry.
Sure.
You didn't ask me. I prefer getting questions in advance so that we can prepare adequately, and then you could ask the questions also at the meeting. I prefer that so that we can, get all the information together. I think
sounds good. So when I ask questions ahead of time, you might already give me answers, so I don't even have to ask.
Yeah, but sometimes those questions benefit other board members also, and any members of the public who are watching. So yeah, sometimes it bears repeating too.
Okay, so I'll send a question in first. Thank you.
Thank you,
Krish.
Okay, so I think we have a plan going forward. Do we need any resolutions or anything, or is Ms. Pisano, do you have sufficient information to document this in the minutes and for follow-up?
Yes, we have sufficient info to move forward.
Okay, so if you put the agenda back up, I think the last item is to schedule our next meeting.
Next, we have an IT and AMI audit overview.
Yes.
Yeah, so we have Nick from our IT as an IT analyst who's going to go through the overview. Go ahead, Nick.
All right, thank you, Amrit.
I think we're going to take our leave. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brett.
Thank you, Brett.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I was just going to dive a little bit deeper into the IT audit and the AMI audit. I think Amber touched on it a little bit earlier, but we'll spend a few minutes and go over each item or each audit and then answer any questions that you may have throughout the presentation. Next slide, please. So I always like to start off any IT presentation with some disturbing facts and numbers. These numbers are getting worse every year, so there's probably not going to see a huge increase in these numbers going down. But our job in IT is to try to make us less risky, or to make it less risky and to make it harder for attacks to happen towards us, right? So back in 2018, we started our first IT audit, and then we also started a budget towards cybersecurity for SVCE. Next slide, please. So we really tried to get in front of any breaches or any possible hacks by providing the environment some quality tools, tested tools, and then also staff trainings, anything that can lessen our attack vulnerabilities. So we started the audit in 2018. The first one was really simple. It just kind of just audited where we were at that time, which was very small footprint. We were like a startup. So we just had probably like a two-page audit, and there was a lot of recommendations, and we acted on those. 2019, it was a little bit more in-depth on the audit, and then we followed up on the recommendations and made it a little bit stronger. 2020 was when we really started to really evaluate our security posture, and we took a more in-depth audit, and we looked at policies and procedures, to the infrastructure, to the user interface, to how we trained our staff. So we dove a lot deeper into our day-to-day operations because we were bigger. So we doubled in size probably as employee-wise, and then our network footprint got a lot larger as well. 2020, we also asked for some auditing on the work from home and COVID recommendations since that was brand new for us. And then 2021, the audit that we're going to currently do, we're going to pretty much follow the same footprint that we did last year on the audit, but we're going to ask for additional work from home ideas on how we can improve, since it's a home networks and those kinds of things. And then also, addition to what COVID, what the next plan of action we should be doing for a company our size and with our data footprint getting bigger as well. And then we're also going to be revising our IT policies. We're still using policies from like 2018 and 19, so we're going to modify and adapt our policies to where our security posture is today. Next slide, please. So our timeline is we're currently probably halfway through the RFP for our audit vendor selection. We had our Q&A submission due yesterday, so that those were posted on our website, or the answers to the questions were posted. We hope to have a vendor selected by the end of this month, March, start the audit in April, wrap the audit in June, possibly July, and then work on the recommendations and remediations in August, and hopefully get those done through October. Remediations can be as easy as fixing some patch vulnerabilities on systems, all the way up to firewall has some bad policies. It just depends on what our snapshot looks at that time. Next slide, please. So this is a table that shows how the audit has progressed from 2019 to today. As you can see, our 2018 and 19, the audit was pretty limited because our network and our infrastructure was pretty limited. As we gotten a bigger footprint than the audit has as well. So it covers probably more than a company our size needs, but we want to make sure that we're one step ahead than what the hacker community is at. There's a saying, there's an unfortunate saying in the IT world that it's not a matter of if you get hacked or breached, it's when, and are you prepared for it? So we try to really be prepared and overly prepared for it. Next slide, please. Okay, so the IT audit and the AMI audit are different. The IT audit is something that we do. because we want to do. I think we were the first or one of the first CCAs to do an IT audit back in 2018. And since then, I know several other CCAs have followed suit. The AMI audit is one that is mandated for a CCA to do every 3 years. And it's not 3 years. All right, next slide, please. Sorry. It's not 3 years from when your company starts. It's 3 years based on a CPUC timeline. So it was 2018 was our first one. And now our next one is 2021. I'm sorry, 2022. Yeah. So I put a link in here to the CPU decision. If you want to read through it, it's like 80 pages long. Some people like that, but it's basically, it's very similar to what the IT audit is, but it focuses more on customer data and how we transmit that customer data if we share it. So back in 2019, when we did the first AMI audit, we were actually in the middle of an IT audit as well, and they did overlap slightly, but the AMI audit focuses probably 75% more on customer data. So that is the main difference. But we will get a printout next year of the general IT stuff as well. So patch management and firewall, like all that stuff will be part of the AMI audit, but it'll be heavily focused on how we secure the data and what we do with the data. Next slide. Okay, the last slide. Yeah, so that was a really quick introduction to the IT audit and the AMI audit. So if there's any questions, I'd be more than happy to address.
Should I just ask the question?
Sure, just go ahead.
Okay, so the AMI audit, that's required by California Public Utilities Commission. Is that a new thing?
I don't know exactly when the CPUC decision was created, but I can double check on that. Yeah, it was new to us in 2018-19, but I'm not sure how far back it goes.
Okay, so it's every 3 years. So
Yeah.
we did it 2022, then it's 2025. So
Exactly.
that's basically for customer protection because we have their private information.
Yes,
Okay.
but it does also do the IT audit to make sure that when the data is with us, we have safeguards in place. And if you don't have the safeguards in place, it gets reported to the CPUC. It's
Okay.
yeah.
So I'm confused. Our own IT audit is this, but it's related.
Yes, they're very well. I mean, they're very similar, but the AMI audit spends a lot more resources and time looking at the customer data specifically, where the IT audit looks at everything from user's laptop to network infrastructure to policies and like everything. So it's a complete security posture review, where the AMI audit is like an IT audit light, but with more focus on customer data.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, so the IT audit is done in-house, right? Yeah, I mean, your group.
Well, it's we select a vendor each year, so this will be our fourth different vendor. So we want to do different vendors every year, so that way the audit will also audit last year's audit. If that makes any sense.
Okay.
So we're doing the RFP now to select a vendor, and then that vendor we work with the vendor, but at the end of the day they have control of the IT tools for a short amount of time, so they can do a complete audit without my being able to help fudge numbers, so it's complete separation with our involvement.
Right, and you would do the same thing with the AMI audit. You're going to outsource that too, I mean, based on your project plan?
Yes, exactly.
So did we do, after our IT audit previous years, did we experience any data, I mean, hacking or anything like that we could do an improvement based on the IT audit?
Yeah, we did not experience any breaches or exposures, but we did make a lot of changes based upon the recommendations from the audit.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you.
So when I heard automated meter infrastructure audit, I thought it had something to do with the actual meter reading itself, because that's all automated now. It's all electronic from the meter directly to PG&E. And then PG&E does all the delivery, and SVCE buys the electricity, sources it, and then has that put into the grid. So this has nothing to do with the meters in and of themselves as devices. Is that correct?
Correct. This is just, yeah, this just has to do with the data provided probably by those meters. And once we get access to that data from Calpine or from PG&E.
Okay.
And by customer data, it's mainly name, address, account number, and like interval usage of power. No social security as far as I know, and no credit card information. So it's limited customer data, but it's still sensitive enough that we need to report on it and be audited on it.
Okay. I'm not sure if there's any members of the public that are there, but should we ask if anyone has any questions?
Yes, we can open it up. It doesn't look like anybody is on the Zoom call.
Okay, so we'll close the public portion of item 4. Is there anything else on item 4 that we need to cover?
If there's nothing else from staff or no additional questions or comments, I believe we can move on to item 5.
Okay. Item 5 has to do with essentially
Chair, looks like you're muted.
Sorry, I was pushing the wrong button. So with respect to our next meeting, usually there's a pace to these in that I think in the past it was June-ish, September-ish, December, January, February. And Amrit, what would you suggest that our meeting dates be?
One suggestion is we consider September. That's a natural time frame when we will have mostly finished our audit, IT audit, so we can come back and share the findings of the IT audit. And it's also the time when we will kick off our financial audit for the current fiscal year. So that's one a good time frame we can come back to.
Okay.
Go ahead. And there's no, as we mentioned before, there's no AMI audit this year. So it's just the IT audit and the financial audit.
Right. I've got to look at the charter once again, the audit committee charter, and I may recommend some changes to that. But on the audit side, I know that the audit committee should have an understanding of what the audit plan is going forward. And Mr. Bradford left the meeting, and it wasn't clear what their timeline is. So how about we do this? You're saying your preference would be for September, and if we we need to meet with the external auditors before then, we do so. Otherwise, we meet in September. Does that sound acceptable? That's a question for everyone.
That sounds good.
I agree too.
But just one question, Girish, I don't think from the presentation, the IT will be done by September. I look at data, it says October. it's probably in process in September. I don't think it's going to come out.
Yeah, but yeah, it will. We will know our results as to what we need to remediate by, and I think by end of June. So
Okay.
we will be working on remediations probably that will go through the rest of the year. But we should be in good position in September to come and report to you where we are and what the IT audit found.
Okay,
What
that sounds
vulnerabilities
good.
are and what we're working on. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
So, Ms. Pisano, I would ask you, as the keeper of the calendar, when you believe this group should meet, if it's in September, and or based on my next conversation, I'll find out if what works with the external auditors, if we have to have a meeting before then. But what would you suggest?
Well, we do have a board meeting the second week of September, so I think staff preference would be to have it the week of 13th, 20th, or 27th if possible.
Okay. Other directors, do you have a preference?
I have none. Thank you, Chair.
Do you mean in that the week of August 26th, 27th, or September, after the board meeting or before the board meeting?
September, following our September board meeting.
Okay. Wednesday, this time is fine with me, if that works for everybody.
Wednesday is better for me as well.
I don't have my calendar in front of me, but what day is the 16th? What day of the week is the 16th?
The 16th of September is Thursday.
Oh.
Staff actually has a conflict on September 15th in the afternoon, but the following week, September 22nd afternoon is open.
Thursday is fine with me too, so I'm open. Depends on the other directors.
My daughter's birthday is the 16th, so that's fine.
That's important, Brian. I think that's important. So, okay. So Cal City's conference is from September 22nd to the 24th, and I'm attending that, so I don't know their schedule. I'm pretty sure it's Zooming. So I guess if we have to do the 22nd, I can Zoom out of Cal City's conference and attend this. Anybody else is attending Cal City's conference?
I am too.
Yeah, so that might be a problem.
What are the other choices again? September 6th.
No, 16th is Brian's daughter's birthday. And 15th, I think the staff has something else. Okay. Friday the 17th?
Yes, that's better for me. 17th of September is good.
How about staff? Because, you know, the staff needs to.
That would work fine with staff.
And Brian? Oh, we can hear you. You're muted.
Can you hear me now? We could do the 16th if it's during the day. That's fine. If it's if the 16th works better with everyone, then I can make that work.
I'm okay with either one. It's up to you.
I'm okay. 16 and 17, both days are fine with me.
Me too. So you choose.
If it works with staff, then let's do the 16th then at 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock. Do you prefer 3 o'clock?
I'm open.
Okay.
Okay, that's good too.
3 o'clock on the 16th.
Okay.
Done.
And we can say happy birthday to your daughter, Brian, that day.
Yes, we can. Okay.
Great, thank you. This is an action item, so I don't know if somebody would like to make an official motion. We can vote on it.
So move.
I'll second.
Thank you. I see no members of the public. If there are no additional questions or comments, I can do a roll call vote.
Roll call vote, please.
Thank you. Chair Makachuk,
Aye.
Vice Chair Wei,
Aye.
Chua.
Aye.
Thank you. And that motion carries with Director Martinez-Beltran absent to have a meeting on September 16th at 3 p.m. And if a meeting is needed in June, we will call a meeting then.
Okay.
So no further business. We adjourn the meeting at 4:37 p.m. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank